Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about the difference between a low power variable, like we have with our Strike Eagle 1 to 6 here in this case, a red dot and magnifier combination like we have here. In this case it's our SPARC solar matched up with the Micro6x magnifier, but for the sake of conversation this applies to really any type of red dot you'd put in front of a magnifier, even holographic sights as well. And also prismatic sights, magnified in that case, like our Spitfire Gen 2 5X here. Also worth mentioning, for the sake of comparison across all these different optics, we do have a Viper red dot mounted on top of this Spitfire Gen 2. The Spitfire Gen 2 5X is the only Prism sight in our lineup that has the ability to mount a red dot on top of it. In order to make the comparison a little bit more even, we have done that, so that way you do have the 1X option essentially on top with the 5X option through the actual optic. Now, first things first, across all of these various different optics, most of them, we're going to assume in this case, are going on top of a carbine, like an AR-15, a very versatile firearm, one that can be used up close and fast, as well as reaching out to more mid-range distances. So that's how we have all these optics set up to be. We have that 1X option, as well as a magnified option. So the end concept might be the same across all these different setups, but the way that they do it, the form factor they take up on your rifle, and the way that they're bringing you 1X and or a higher magnification is certainly different. So we're going to dive into those differences right now. The first consideration you're going to want to take into account is just how you're actually going to mount these optics on top of your rifle. Now again, we're going to be speaking mostly to an AR-15 in this case, so let's look at the red dot and magnifier combo first up. So obviously we have to get two separate optics in order to make this work. The red dot and the magnifier. They're going to have to mount up next to each other, one behind the other, and we're going to have to make sure that we have enough space on top of our rail to fit that. If you're running a bunch of other accessories on your top rail, then you may need to do a little bit of work to try and make this all fit. Of course, the other thing we need to take into consideration is the height of the optic. Our red dot or holographic sight is going to have a height that it either comes out of the box or that we have selected to put it at. Some optics are even being mounted up quite a bit higher these days. Whatever height you have that primary aiming optic set at, you're going to have to make sure the magnifier matches it in order to work properly. With the low power variable, again like this Strike Eagle 1 to 6 in this case, we do only need one optic, but we're going to need a means of attaching it to our rifle, so we're going to have to head to the rings and mounts section to figure out what method we want to use. Traditionally speaking, on an AR-15 platform, we're going to want to use a one-piece cantilever mount. In this case, we'd select one with 30mm rings, although we'd want to always make sure that we're matching up the ring size to the tube size on the optic. One of the things we will say about something like a low power variable is that it is shaped, and the way it's mounted to a rifle is more in line with that of a traditional rifle scope. So if you're looking to put something on more of a traditional rifle, like a hunting rifle or really anything else other than an AR-15, you can use regular two-piece rings or really any other ring setup, again, as long as it's matching the tube size correctly. When it comes to the Spitfire Gen 2 5X here, certainly it takes up the least amount of space on top of your rifle. It's also the lightest weight option here. You can see front to back, it is the shortest optic overall. Mounting it up is pretty straightforward. If you are going to do the red dot mount on top, just make sure that whatever optic you get to go on top of your Prism sight has the right bolt pattern and footprint in order to fit on top. Another thing regarding space and form factor considerations, with our low power variable here, it might be the longest optic overall, but it's certainly going to take up the least amount of space side to side and also up and down. This depends a little bit on what mount you decide to go with, but once you do mount it up in that mount, the optic is as you see it. It's not really going to change. With our red dot and magnifier combination, when they're all in line, it's a pretty sleek profile, but keep in mind, if you flip that magnifier to the side to just use the red dot, you are adding width to your rifle. Then in the case of the Spitfire Gen 2 here, if you add that red dot on top, you're adding height. Now when you're actually using these sights, let's talk about how you would go from 1X to whatever the highest magnification is. In the case of our Strike Eagle and our magnifier, that would be 6X. In the case of our Spitfire Gen 2, that would be 5X. With this red dot or holographic sight magnifier combination, you saw earlier, now we have the magnifier engaged. We are seeing everything at 6 power. We flip it to the side. Now we're using that red dot or holographic sight on 1 power for shooting up nice and close and fast. With our low power variable, now we have a magnification ring, just like we would on a regular rifle scope as well. So if we want 6 power or 1 power, we're just going to have to rotate that all the way to the side. Now, of course, with this magnification ring, it allows us to select any magnification between 1 and 6, which these other options do not have. They're either a 1 or 5 or a 1 or 6. Here we could set it at 2, 3, 3.5, whatever we wanted. When it comes to the Spitfire Gen 2 5X here, it really just comes down to a change of eye position behind the whole setup to get our desired magnification. It's also worth mentioning too that we're actually going to get a different reticle depending on which optic we're looking through. In this case, we just have our Viper red dot up top. This has a 6 MOA red dot we would be using on 1X. We might have to have a little bit higher head position in order to look through that optic. And when we get down on the stock to look through our Spitfire Gen 2 5X here, we're going to get a different sight picture, obviously 5X magnification, and then a different reticle altogether as well. Speaking of reticles, let's go into the differences in the reticles that you're going to be using for aiming with these sights. With our red dot or holographic sight, a lot of this is going to depend on which optic you have in front of the magnifier. Again, in this particular case, we have our SPARC Solar with a 2 MOA dot, so that's what we're going to have to use up close, which it's great for that, and it's even pretty good when we're shooting out at mid distances. But of course, in comparison to something like our low power variable, which can have a bit more comprehensive and a bit more technical reticle, it might give us more data that can come in handy at those longer ranges. Then, as we mentioned with the Spitfire 5X, it's really a matter of two different reticles. We have the red dot for up close and fast, and then we have a little bit more technical and comprehensive reticle inside, but you only get one or the other depending on which optic you're looking through at the time. One other thing about the reticle in the Spitfire Gen 2 5X here specifically, and really all Prism sights, is that you're getting an etched reticle. So while this might look an awful lot like a red dot that you'd see on top of a rifle that uses an LED, where if that battery dies that's shining the LED, then you're left without a point of aim. In this case, if your battery died that's powering the illumination of this reticle, then you'd just be left with a regular black reticle inside like you'd get with really any other type of rifle scope. One more thing about reticles, a consideration you might want to take into account when selecting your optic for your rifle. When we talk about something like our Spitfire Gen 2 5X here, this has our AR BDC-4 inside. It's a BDC specific to the 5.56 caliber, giving you drops out at varying distances. It's really handy to use, and one of the nice things about it is, or really simple things about it, is that this optic is always fixed at 5 power. So there's no way for you to change the magnification, thus potentially changing the subtensions and kind of screwing up your BDC. In the case of a low power variable, if it is second focal plane, like our Strike Eagle 1-6 is here, then that BDC inside, if it has one or other subtensions, is usually going to be calibrated to work properly on the highest magnification. So if we want to shoot on 3 power, then those subtensions will mean different things because we've changed the size of the image, we haven't changed the size of the reticle. So the scale is different. If we have a first focal plane low power variable, then that sort of negates the issue altogether. But there's other things that go along with that. Of course, in the case of our red dot and magnifier, we really don't have a whole lot to worry about with this particular setup and a lot of other red dots and holographic sights because usually you're just kind of using that dot. So you're not using a whole lot of subtensions. If you do have a red dot or a holographic sight that does have some sort of drops in it or subtensions of some kind, you don't have to worry about it changing if you have the magnifier disengaged or engaged because we are magnifying, when we flip this in place, both the image and the reticle. Everything magnifies together and everything then goes back to 1x together, so your subtensions will always be correct regardless of whether this is engaged or not. Another difference we'll talk about is eye relief, or where your eye needs to be in relation to the scope front and back in order to get in that sweet spot to have the best image possible to make your shot. We'll start with the red dot and magnifier combination here again. Now, when the magnifier is engaged, we do have to play within the rules, so to speak, of where our eye relief is with this magnifier. And by nature of the way magnifiers work, they're going to have a little bit shorter eye relief than something like our low power variable. We're talking about an AR, generally speaking here, or a carbine chambered usually in 5.56 where recoil isn't that big of a concern, so it's probably not going to be an issue at all, but it is worth thinking about if you're going to put this setup on something that's going to move more on you when you shoot, a little bit higher recoil perhaps. You're going to be closer up on this optic in particular. But when we move the magnifier out of the way and now we're just using the red dot or a holographic sight, this is where these sights really shine because they have unlimited eye relief. Our head position can be realistically anywhere behind this optic, and as long as we can see the reticle, we're good to take the shot. With our Spitfire Gen 2 5X here, this is a little bit different again because we're using two completely separate aiming optics in this case. Prism sights also have a little bit shorter eye relief, generally speaking, than the low power variable. So your eye will be a little bit closer up on the sight when you're shooting. Very similar to the magnifier. But again, if you're up off the stock a little bit more using the red dot, you take advantage of the unlimited eye relief of the red dot. If you're considering any one of these setups for your firearm, then chances are one of the things you're wondering about is how it performs on 1X specifically. And when it comes to the low power variable, really any optic that starts out on 1X for the low side of its magnification range, then for all intents and purposes, you are getting a true 1X image on the low end. There's a little bit of fine tuning you can do with the diopter. This is dependent on shooter and your particular eye. It will be different for you than perhaps your shooting buddy at the range. That can help a little bit, but we are delivering you this image through an entire optical system. So inherently there's going to be a bit of distortion there. It'll feel a bit different than if you're looking through a red dot or a holographic sight, which is going to get you closer to what you'd be seeing just with the regular naked eye. So there you have it, folks. If you are in the market for an optic to go on top of your AR-15 or other rifle, and you're considering a prismatic sight like our Spitfire Gen 2 5X, a low power variable, or a red dot and magnifier combination, those are some of the major differences you're going to want to take into account. If you have any other questions at all about these optics in particular, or really anything in our entire line, please let us know. You can hit us up in those comments below. You can also hit us up via phone, email, social media, whatever works best for you. We love hearing from you guys, and until the next video, we'll see you later.